You are listening to End of Life University podcast, real talk about life and death. This is episode number 181. Welcome to End of Life University podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, hospice physician, author, and educator. In this podcast, I share thoughtful conversations with experts in various fields related to dying and death, and informative teaching sessions on preparing for the end of life by living fully today. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're joining me here today for this solo episode. Today is the first part in a series I'm planning called Mortal Wisdom, which is all about the wisdom we came here to learn as mortal human beings on planet Earth. And the first part that I'll be discussing today is on the lesson of impermanence. And those of you who listen regularly might recall that around 3 weeks ago in episode number 178, I was actually planning to do this discussion when the day before the recording began, I learned about the deaths of two remarkable women, Mary Oliver, the American poet, and Meggery Anderson, who's one of our pioneers in the sacred dying movement. And so episode number 178 changed into a tribute for those two women, and this episode on impermanence got postponed until today. So in a few minutes, you'll be able to listen to my discussion about that topic. But before we get there, I wanted to first of all mention, as you know, if you listen regularly, that this podcast is sponsored by donations on my page at patreon.com/EOLU. And today I have 3 new patrons who've all signed up in the last week to thank: John Malloy, Victoria Jenkins, and Joanna D. I want to thank you all so much for your contributions. It means everything to me. And if any of you listening are interested in joining our team and becoming a sponsor as well, you can go to patreon.com/EOLU and sign up for as little as $1 a month to help support this podcast. And you'll receive some bonuses along the way for becoming a patron. So thank you once again to everybody who's offering your support. I also wanted to mention to you, particularly because it's relevant to today's subject, my most recent book, which is The Tao of Death. And this book is an adaptation of Lao Tzu's book, The Tao Te Ching. And those of you who might not be familiar with The Tao Te Ching, it's a book of philosophy that was written more than 2,000 years ago, believed to have been written by a Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, as much as we know about it historically. But the Tao Te Ching is a compilation of 89 verses that are all philosophical, little poetic verses about life and the way to live life. And so I adapted those 89 verses into my book, The Tao of Death, and wrote about the way of death and how we should be living in light of the fact that we're mortal, and how we should be living as we are aware of our deaths and hold death in our hands, along with holding life in our hands. And so I just wanted to mention that book to you because it is very applicable to the topic we'll be discussing today. If you haven't read it, you can get it on Amazon in print or digital form. And I've also made a companion journaling guide that goes along with the book. So there's a journal prompt for each one of the 89 verses. And I recommend, if you decide to read it, that you read one verse a day and journal about the inspiration you get from reading that verse. So that's the Tao of Death, and I will leave a link to it in the show notes for today's episode, and you can find those at eolupodcast.com. And this is episode number 181. So that's the book, The Tao of Death. And Tao is spelled T-A-O. Many people mispronounce it, which is understandable, and pronounce it Tao, but it's actually pronounced with a D sound, The Tao of Death. So let's go ahead and discuss our topic for today, which is impermanence. And I wanted to start out by telling you how a few weeks ago I was walking along a river where I often go for contemplative walks. This is in my home in the mountains in Colorado. And of course, it's wintertime. And so it was very chilly that morning. And as I walked along the river, it was not too long after the sun had just risen over the mountains. And so the sun's rays were angled across the river. And as I walked along, I observed that all of the branches of the trees next to the river, every blade of grass, every needle on each pine tree, every dried blossom from every flower was covered with tiny crystalline frost that morning because the morning dew had frozen instantly on all of the branches and every leaf, everything in sight was covered with this amazing frost, and it was sparkling in the sunlight because of the angle of the sun's rays as they hit these little crystals of frost. And so everything around me as I walked next to that stream was sparkling with frost. It was an amazing sight. And there were also little sparkles in the air as the droplets of moisture that were in the air froze and then were illuminated by the sunlight. And so it was the most magical sight to look around and see everything just covered in these sparkling crystals everywhere. And so even though I was out there walking to get my exercise for the day and doing my power walking, I stopped in the middle of that walk and just stood there and looked at everything and gazed at these beautiful crystals of frost and took it all in. I stood there in the rays of sunlight for a few minutes observing all of it. And I realized, why was I so taken by this sight? And why was I so willing to interrupt my workout and stop to take in the beauty of this moment? And the reason why is because I knew that it wouldn't last. I knew that within a few more minutes, the sun would rise higher in the sky and the sun's rays wouldn't filter across my path in just the same way they were in that moment. And also the temperature would rise a few degrees, which would cause the frost particles to melt and the crystals to disappear and become water droplets on the branches. And so I happened to be at the right place at exactly the right time of day, at exactly the right temperature to witness this scene of this beautiful frost illuminated by the early morning sun on the trees. And that doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen all that often necessarily that I'm there at exactly the right time to see that. And so that moment was so special, and that sight was so special that I was happy to interrupt my exercise and happy to stop and just be there and witness it for a few moments to take it in. And that particular experience is a good illustration of the power of impermanence. And when we begin to recognize in life that things are not permanent and don't last, it reminds us that we need to appreciate them right now when they're available to us, because we may not see that again. We may not have that experience again in the future. So my little moment as I was on my walk was a powerful reminder of this lesson of impermanence, it's a Buddhist concept. And what it means is that nothing lasts and everything changes. Nothing in the universe lasts. Everything is in the process of change. Everything is on its way from being one thing to becoming another thing. And so the particles of frost that had formed on those branches, however long that happened before I arrived in that moment, were on their way to melting And I just happened to be there in the moment to capture them and see them while they were still frozen and while they were being illuminated by the rays of sun. But they were in the midst of their own process of appearing and then disappearing again. And everything in existence is exactly like those crystals of frost. Everything is on its own path. Everything is in the process of dissolving away and disappearing. And it's so important that we remember that lesson and that we remember the power of impermanence and the power of the fact that things do not last. Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice. It's not the same river, and he's not the same man." And he's describing this process of change and flow that runs throughout all of life and throughout the universe. Nothing is the same from one moment to the next. And that's an amazing and powerful concept, even though in our minds we often perceive that things stay the same around us. Sometimes moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, even for years at a time, we might perceive that things are staying the same. But if we were truly awake and truly knew what to watch for, we would be able to see this constant process of change. In fact, this constant change is even written into the laws of the universe. The second law of thermodynamics is about entropy, which is the natural tendency to move from order to disorder, to move from a more structured state to a non-structured state. And someone said, if you think about entropy in your own household, think about how often you have to clean and straighten things almost every day. There's disorder that seems to occur in the household, and you end up having to pick things up and put things away because there's a natural tendency for things to become disordered. And the tendency also is to move from a formed state to a freer state, and to move from structure to non-structure. So think about ice melting to become water, the frost melting to become droplets of water. That is entropy, this movement in the direction of less structure, less order, less form. That's the natural tendency of things in the universe. And so this includes these human bodies that we exist in. They also are on their pathway of moving from order to disorder, from structure to non-structure. And there's a quote from Sogyal Rinpoche, who said, in Tibetan, the word for body is lu, L-U, which means something you leave behind, like baggage. We're only travelers taking temporary refuge in this life and this body. And that's a great description of the impermanence of our bodies as well. Our bodies are baggage. They're something we're going to leave behind. They're something that are going to slowly and gradually dissolve and become less formed and less structured over time with aging and death. And that's a normal process that we will experience. However, it's a process that essentially everyone fears and resists and struggles against. And the title for my topic today is Why It's Good to Be Mortal, and yet almost no one believes that it's good to be mortal. For the most part, we find that a disturbing and strange aspect of our existence here on this planet. Why is it that we age? Why is it that we die? And it's one of our greatest conundrums that we have to live with. And that, in fact, most of us try not to even think about and not to acknowledge in life. But my contention is that it's good to be mortal, and it's important for us to learn to accept our mortality since it's the reality of our existence, but also to appreciate it and to understand why impermanence is a good thing. And in the first place, impermanence is necessary for change to take place. Without impermanence, our entire planet couldn't exist. Impermanence, the fact that things can change and can transform, is what has resulted in all of life being in existence. And so all creativity, all growth, all evolution comes from impermanence and comes from this ability to change and transform. And so even within our own lives, if we look at it, our ability to grow and to learn new things and our ability to change how we do things relies upon impermanence and the fact that nothing stays the same. We benefit from it in every way. And in addition, you'll remember the old saying, this too shall pass. Even our suffering and our times of struggle are also impermanent. They will also pass away. They are not going to last forever. So even during times when we're in pain and when we're feeling depressed or down, we can remember this too is impermanent. This moment when I feel so terrible and life looks so bleak is also not going to last forever. This will also fade away. This will also change. And there's some comfort in that, in knowing in this moment, everything that's good that's happening right now will change, but everything that I don't like and everything that I'm uncomfortable about also will change over time. And so there's a curious comfort in impermanence, in knowing that tomorrow will be different. There will be new things to be excited about. There will be new things to be concerned about. There will be new things to deal with. But change is continuously happening all around us. Now, I often talk about one of my taglines at the end of this podcast is the importance of facing your fear. And I'm talking, of course, about the fear of death, facing up to the fact that each one of us is mortal and each one of us will die. And it's essential for living our best lives and our fullest, most productive and creative lives that we embrace this idea that we're not here forever. Life is fleeting. These bodies are like baggage that we're going to leave behind. And so we need to make the most of every moment that we have. And that's one of the greatest values of learning the lesson of impermanence, is that it reminds us, stop for a moment, stop and look at the little crystals of frost and how they're sparkling in the sunlight, because you might not get a chance to see that again. Stop and appreciate it right now. Don't rush through the moment and don't miss what's here and available for you in each and every moment. That's the value of recognizing impermanence. It helps us remember to slow down and to take in everything that life is offering us right now in each and every moment. Another value of this lesson of impermanence that I find, at least that I find really comforting, is the fact that it's the unifying characteristic of all life in the universe. Think about it. As much as we look around our planet and we see people who are different from us, and we feel sometimes that we are separate from them, we feel divisions between us, we see that we think differently, we believe in different things, we have different goals for our lives, we find that we're struggling to figure out how to stay connected. And yet, the fact that we're mortal, the fact that we will die one day, which is the most significant feature of our existence here, that's something that we share with everyone on the planet, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, race, culture, age, gender, regardless of any other characteristics. The fact that we're mortal is the one thing that binds us all together. And that's an incredibly powerful bond if we were to embrace it and if we were to connect with each other around the fact that we're all mortal. We can connect with each other around the fact that every one of us loves and has loved someone who will die. Every one of us is going to grieve at some point during our life. Every one of us will feel the sorrow of loss and the pain of watching someone we care about die. And every one of us will face our own death. Every one of us will be at a moment when we know this is now my time. This is my time to die. That's incredible. That's an incredible commonality to share with every other person on this planet, and not just the human beings, but we share it with all of life on this planet. We share it with the entire universe because we also know that every star in the heavens will die one day. We know that everything is moving toward dissolution. Everything is moving toward disorder, toward non-structure, toward less form. And we share it with all of life on the planet. As I said, it's our unifying characteristic. So it's the one thing that we can focus on and acknowledge and keep in mind every time we meet someone new or every time we see someone that we think we have nothing in common with. We can remember this person as well is mortal. This person as well will one day face their own grief and face their own end of life. And we can utilize that characteristic to help us find common ground and to help us bond together. I mentioned the concept of entropy, the tendency for everything to go from order to disorder. The word entropy actually comes from the Greek word entropia, which means literally a turning toward or transformation. And I think that's a beautiful reminder that impermanence, entropy, is all about transformation, changing form. And that's what we're really looking for in our lives. We're looking for ways to transform ourselves, ways to grow, ways to evolve, ways to become our best selves, to become better people. When I consider the dying process as I have observed it through my work in hospice, I've thought of it as a dissolving away of the physical body to reveal more and more of the soul, the spiritual body that exists within a person. And so the physical form is gradually becoming less and less ordered. And the non-structured aspect of a person's being, the soul, is becoming more and more powerful as the physical form dissolves. There's tremendous beauty in that. And those who've worked with the dying, I know that you have witnessed that as well. I know that you have seen the light that appears to be coming from our patients as they get close to dying, when they appear to be more and more illuminated. That's the process I'm describing of this, the body, the physical form dissolving away to release more and more of the non-structured aspect of the person, the soul, the spirit. And so if we can think of dying in that regard, that dying is simply the non-structured aspect of us, the soul or the spirit, leaving behind the physical baggage that isn't needed anymore. I think the prospect of dying becomes a little bit less fearful when we remember that there is a part of us that will not die. Our spiritual aspect will not die. Our spiritual aspect is simply leaving behind the physical form to release itself, to become freer in non-structure than it was when it was in a physical state. I want to read you something. This is actually something that I wrote when I was writing the adaptation of the Tao of Death, and this didn't quite make it in the book. I'm not sure why I left it out, but I wanted to read this to you because it is a message about this impermanence that I'm talking about. Learn to embrace your own death and the suffering you encounter in life will seem small in comparison. Learn to love the fact that you will die, and you will be capable of loving everyone. Learn to forgive your own mortality, and you will no longer hold resentment for anything. Learn to sit with your own fear of death, and your presence will instantly free others of their anxiety. Learn that the purpose of your life is to live as fully as possible and die when that time comes. And you will shine a light for others to find their own paths. Learn to surrender to whatever life is bringing to you, and you will be free no matter your circumstances. Learn that nothing lasts and everything changes, and the impermanence of this material world will become the greatest gift you have ever received. So that underscores what I was saying. When we can embrace this impermanence, when we can embrace our mortality and actually begin to see it's good that I'm not going to be here forever. It's good that I have to struggle with the fact that everything is changing. I grow older every day. My life is moving in a certain direction, and it's moving toward my death and toward my ultimate dissolution. So I need to take advantage of this moment right now. I need to learn how to love. I need to face my fear so that I don't waste my time in fear and resistance. I need to learn to shine my light. I need to learn to carry as much love as I possibly can in the world. I need to learn how to connect with other people while I have the chance. I need to learn to appreciate this flow, this constant flow of life, and to recognize that it is the flow of love, and that I am gradually being drawn toward more and more love, greater and greater expression of love, as I leave behind this baggage of physical existence, a few molecules at a time in my process. I'm being drawn more and more toward the highest spiritual being that I can be, and that is love. And that is actually what I came here for, is to learn how to love and to be love in the world. So the more I can embrace my own impermanence and my own mortality, the more I'm free to move toward love, toward becoming a loving being, a vessel of love for the rest of the world, for gradually becoming a spirit of love at the time of my death, when I am no longer a physical form. I am the pure energy of love. And so I want to end by talking a little bit about how we can celebrate our impermanence, because it doesn't happen very often in our society that we're encouraged to celebrate impermanence. Most often we're encouraged to avoid it and deny it and be fearful of it. So I want to talk about some ideas that I have for impermanence. So how do we get comfortable with this idea of our mortality, with our impermanence? How do we make it a part of our lives that we can keep in our awareness at all times? And I mentioned my book, The Tao of Death, because I think that's something that we could utilize. Reading and contemplating death and mortality is one of the ways we can remind ourselves on a daily basis that I won't be here forever. Life doesn't last forever. And so a book like The Tao of Death, which, as I said, it has verses in it, so you can simply read one verse a day and let that be a reminder for that particular day about your own mortality, and utilize it as the basis for contemplation and journaling as you study impermanence and study your own mortality. So that's one thing that you can use. But there are also some rituals that you can practice. And one of these, which I've been using quite a lot lately, is the idea of simply observing nature and the changes that happen in nature on a day-to-day basis. And so for this ritual, if you're able to get outside and do some walking outside, every day, which I highly recommend, no matter what the weather's like. If you're able to just go outside, even for 10 or 15 minutes, find a place that you can visit on a regular basis. It's great if it's something where there's nature, trees, water, something around you that's natural. If you can find a place where you could go and maybe sit on the same bench every day, or the same rock, or walk to the same little meadow or the same tree every day, and just spend a few minutes observing what you see around you. And it's amazing how many changes you'll see on a daily basis if you just spend a little bit of time observing. So go to a place and be very still and just look at what's around you. One of the places where I do this practice is on the beach. When I'm spending time in California, I always go to the same little part of the beach every day, and I stop and I sit down for a moment and I just look around me, and I'm amazed at how many changes I see in just that little spot from one day to the next. Always something new that has washed up during the high tide and been left behind on the beach. Sometimes complete shifting from the very high tides of the rocks and logs that are adjacent to the beach. Almost every day I see something new. I see change in a new form. That also happens when I'm walking in the woods or by the river, when I'm in the mountains. I see new change every single day. Things that I might not have noticed if I hadn't been still and taken the time to just sit in one place and observe. So I think that's a great little ritual and a great practice to remind yourself that nothing lasts, everything changes. Just be still and observe nature. And nature is one of our greatest teachers and comforters about the fact that we're mortal. When you're out in nature, you cannot deny the fact that nothing lasts and everything changes. You see it all around you. You also can't deny the fact that it is impermanence that allows creation to exist. You can see it in the forest every day, that it's the dead leaves that have fallen off the trees, the branches that have broken off and fallen to the ground that are decomposing to allow and nourish new life in the forest. And when you see that over and over again, it's very comforting, and you're reminded that life carries on, but in different physical forms. The energy of life continues, but there are new physical forms that exist. And so when my physical form no longer exists because its time has come to decompose, to dissolve, to fade away, to become less structured, the energy of my life will continue. My spirit will continue. My soul will continue. It's only the physical form that will change and will transform, that will experience entropy. So being in nature and doing this daily observation, very, very powerful. If you like to journal like I do, take your journal and just make little notes every day of what you see and what has changed. Some days it might be tiny, the tiniest thing, but spend time and write down the things that you see. It can be really powerful for you. So that's the first ritual that you can do to help you get comfortable with impermanence. The next, creating mandalas in nature. This is a practice that I've been doing for a number of years, often on camping trips or when I'm out in nature for a prolonged period of time. I gather a lot of natural objects that I find: sticks, pine cones, pine needles, flowers, grasses, stones, whatever I find in nature, and I create my own little mandala. A mandala is a circular geometric shape that has different items placed inside of it. You create a design inside, but the purpose of the mandala in the Buddhist tradition is that Buddhist monks actually create mandalas out of sand, colored sand, and make incredible, intricate, beautiful designs in a huge mandala as large as a large round table. As soon as they're done creating the mandala, and they have a ritual practice of chanting around the mandala, they actually immediately sweep the sand away. They completely destroy the mandala as soon as they've made it, and then carry the sand off and pour it into a moving stream of water. That's a beautiful ritual I've seen, the sand mandala. So I'm creating a mandala with other objects in nature, which likewise will become destroyed. And so I've been doing this on my nature walks lately as I go on my walk, whether I'm in the mountains or on the beach, and whether it's in the snow or in the summertime, I gather natural objects I find along the trail as I go, whatever I happen to find that's just lying there, as if those items came there and presented themselves to me. I gather some of them, and then somewhere along the way, I create a little mandala from them, knowing that that little creation I just made, that little artistic creation, whether it's on the beach or on a rock in the mountains or a log, that it won't last, knowing that the wind will carry it away, the tide will come up and wash away whatever I've placed on the sand. Snow will cover my mandala when I'm in the mountains. Animals might tromp on it, or humans as well, and destroy it. So making a creation that you know won't last, there's something really powerful about it, of acknowledging and celebrating this idea that there's beauty in the world for this moment, for right now, but it doesn't last and it doesn't stay, and that's okay. In fact, it's almost even more beautiful because it's so exquisite and profound that it's only going to exist for a short time. Just like the frost that I appreciated on the tree branches, it's only going to be here a short time. That makes it so, so valuable in this moment. So that's the second ritual. When you're in nature, gather objects, make some sort of a design or a mandala. And on the show notes for this episode, eolupodcast.com, I will post a couple of pictures of some of the mandalas that I've made so that you can see what I'm talking about. How I arrange sticks or seaweed, shells, rocks, leaves, pine cones, whatever it is that I find, into a little design, and then just leave it there. Leave it there with a little bit of a blessing, knowing that this is only temporary. It's not going to last. It will all dissolve. It will all become less structured. The form will disappear. It will become disordered in a very short time. But it's a way of honoring what is temporary, honoring what is impermanent, honoring what is here in this moment that won't last into the next moment. So that's a second little ritual that you can do for impermanence. The third thing that I have sometimes done, which is a way of recognizing the flow of life, is once again gathering things, sticks or flowers or petals or leaves. And if you're out in nature in a place where there's running water and you can go alongside the water, or perhaps on a bridge over the water, you can drop those little objects you found into the river and watch them flow away. And that's another beautiful ritual, just observing the flow and observing how much change there is as water flows, how the shape and the design of the river moves, and the stick that you threw in the river rapidly disappears and moves along. And yet there might be someone downstream who's going to be standing next to the river and will see the stick pass by that you placed in the river. And so there's something very powerful about that, about surrendering the beauty to the flow and allowing it to move away from you. So allowing form and structure to disappear from your life, allowing them to dissolve away, only to be replaced with love, the energy of love in your life. So those were my 3 rituals I wanted to recommend that you can use as you're contemplating impermanence and thinking about the importance of change and the importance of transformation in your own life. And so I wanted to read you one last thing, again, from some of the extra text that didn't make it into the Tao of Death, but that I wrote at that same time. Understand this. It is your ego that cannot bear to hear the name of death. It is your ego that cannot see the light within death. It is your ego that clings to everything that does not have true value. It is your ego that tells you a grandiose story about your life. It is your ego that cannot bear to have its hollow inflatedness punctured by the true sword of death. But all of it, the material pleasure, the grandiosity, the inflatedness, all are just ruses of the ego as it tries desperately to protect its own survival, desperately to believe in its own immortality. Ask your ego to be still for one moment and listen, to hear the soul whispering, I am here, I am love, I am eternal, I can lead you beyond your fear. Death comes only for the physical body and the ego. It doesn't touch the soul. The soul is the creator of all, not touched by death, but transcending death. So I hope you will begin to contemplate your own impermanence, your own mortality, and to begin to see it as something that's good, a good part of your life, and something that you can embrace and appreciate and even celebrate. Once we've begun to accept the idea of impermanence, we can move on and expand our consciousness into other lessons that are important for us to learn as well. And we'll talk about those, about more of this mortal wisdom, the wisdom that comes from being a mortal here on the planet, in future episodes. But until then, I hope that you can rest well and feel calm as a mortal being and relax into the fact that this is why we came here. We came here to be mortal. We came here to experience both birth and death. We came here to dissolve so that we could experience true love and grow into the loving, energetic souls that we were meant to be. And so until the next time we're together, remember that we're here for love. Remember to face your fear, to be ready for whatever life brings your way, and to love each and every moment of your life. Bye-bye.